St. Philip's was really very interesting when I look back and think about it now. It was just a little wooden structure. And it was interesting in that it was a mission, but we sang everything. Even if there wasn't an organist, we still sang everything. For years, I could still remember all of those old little verses and things that we sang all the way through. It was, you don't want to say automatic so that it was like you just do it, but it almost was. And we always had different priests. I actually grew up thinking that there were no black priests because I didn't see any. There weren't any, not in Salisbury. I found out years later that they had a black Episcopal church in Charlotte with a black priest. And I thought, wow, now that's really something. Because I had never seen one. The ones we had were all very good. And in fact, I brought my confirmation certificate. And that, of course, was the priest who became the bishop, who actually closed it. He closed it to get everybody to go to St. Luke's. And I can remember the conversation with my parents that a lot of people were complaining at St. Luke's, because he said, you will all go to St. Luke's where you will be welcome, knowing that that wasn't true. I can remember, that was Moultrie Moore. I can remember when, the one after him, I can't think of his name now, when his wife was pregnant. I don't know if she was the one who extended the invitation to the women at St. Philip's to come to the meeting, to her house to the meeting. It was the parsonage, really. All the women got up and walked out. That's what I heard, because they were not dealing with black women coming in there. And that was hearsay. So he addressed that by telling them, I've heard that some of you are disturbed with the women from, with the members from St. Philip's coming here, because they will come here as members of the church. Or the women were put into what I still call the circles. And he said, and if you have a problem with that, we will certainly miss you. He made it clear they are coming. You will welcome them, and if you have a problem and you leave, you will always remain in my heart and in my prayers, but they are coming. And so they did. When I was growing up, Bishop Pinnock was there, and he was as racist as they come. By the time Reverend Moore became bishop, things had really changed. When I brought my mother to stay with me because she had Alzheimer's, they had one lady who, I don't know if she volunteered or if it was her duty, but she wrote my mother every month for the 2 years that my mother was there with me. Every month that letter came. And it was always a newsy letter. I mean, it wasn't like some form letter. She made sure that there was news about somebody that she knew my mother remembered, or something in what was the black neighborhood. Knowing that she would remember anything about the college, about Livingstone College, or about the people who lived on the street. But that's pretty much how it was. And we went to, I think it was 8 o'clock service, so that when we got back home, because it was around the corner, we walked unless the weather was bad. My father would start dinner, and then he would take me down to Soldiers Memorial, because I went there for Sunday school, and my grandmother was still there. That's why he did not, I think Helen had said that he was a member or something. He didn't become a member until his mother died, out of respect to her as the widow of a Zion minister, because my grandfather, my father's father, was not only a Zion minister, turned out he had graduated from Tuskegee Institute. Nobody knew it. I asked my aunt, I said, why didn't you ever say anything about this? And she said, I just didn't think about it, I guess. And I'm like, how could you not think about it? Because that meant he was one of the early black graduates. He died in July, the year I was born, 1937. So I really don't remember him. But when it was closed, I guess when I look back, that's how I found out. Because even my name was on some letter, and it was my father's handwriting. He put it in there with me being a member of the church. And then I can't remember the man. They had some man who wrote, he's well known in North Carolina, and I can't remember his name, who wrote the history of the Episcopal Church in North Carolina. And that's when I really found out a lot about what was going on in the church, because the black priests were from the central to the east, going east. You had one in Wilson, Father Johnson, Robert Johnson. And he started a camp. I went to an Episcopal camp when I was 10 years old outside Raleigh, because we couldn't go to Vade Mecum up in the mountains. Oh no, you weren't going up there unless you were going to cook or clean up. You could go for that. And I can remember reading in this book how Father Johnson, would beg money at the convention, and at which he wasn't getting. I think the women's group supported it. And it was wild. I grew up a lot going to that camp. When I had to come home, I think that summer I came home and I knew that things were going to have to change. The house was a mess. And it finally dawned on me years later, when I brought her to stay with me, I took her to a church psychologist who also worked with elderly people. And he worked with me as well. And I found out there was a lot that I needed myself, not just dealing with her, but really just getting along in life. And I would take her to St. Luke's. And I remember thinking that was one of the coldest places I'd ever been in my life. And I wasn't used to going in a church feeling like that. I played for churches here in Nashville, at Holy Trinity, at a Baptist church, at a Congregationalist church. I have, up until coming here, I don't think I've touched the piano that we have, and the barbershop quartet meets here every year, and they gave the piano that they used. I remember playing it about a couple of times. I don't think I've touched that piano probably in a few years. But St. Luke's was just a cold place to me. And then when she died, I knew I was going to have to bring her back and have her funeralized from there, because that was her church. What was his name? Mayo Little. That just came to me. I hadn't remembered that to write that down. When I went down, I went down there because I wanted to change my membership. My membership was automatically put there because all of St. Philip's was literally put there. And I told him I needed my name to come out because I wanted the membership to be at the church here in Nashville. And he told me how she was doing. He said, if you notice when she walks, she scuffs her feet. And I had noticed it. It were things that I didn't want to see. And he said, and the back of her clothes are always soiled. So when it was time to bury her, May is a male little, called to tell him that she had died. She was a member, what we were like. And he was just as nasty as he could be. You know, we don't do that here. That may be what you people do. And I thought, you people? After all this time, I'm a you people again. And our priest in Nashville was very disturbed by that. And he said, you know, we can take this out of town. I said, yeah, we can. We can take this to a black church in Greensboro or wherever. It's simply not her church. That is her church. So he said, okay, you let me call. So he called and got it straight. I think it was because I wanted her picture on the front. And they weren't going to have that at St. Luke's. So anyway, we got that. And they had to wait the night before because of her sorority. And because that's how black people are funeralized. They have all that. And I remember that Mayo Little came and he shook people's hands, announced that he had a prior engagement. He wouldn't be able to stay. I just looked at him like, I'm surprised you're here at all. I don't think I said that. Probably because somebody was holding my arm going. And the black ministers, who were all AME Zion and Baptist and Presbyterian, told him not to worry, they would be there to take care of the family, since he would not be able to do that. So the next day at the funeral, you know, when they stood and said everybody, you know, was welcome to come, the blacks lined from where we were sitting back, and not one of them moved, because that was to show what they thought of that church. Because by that time they knew what had happened. So they had to drink a whole lot of wine that day.
What was told to us, as I remember, like I said, they had meetings at church. And the preacher that preached at our church at 9 o'clock preached here at 10. I remember him telling the congregation, or telling them at a meeting, your congregation is so small that it would be better for you all to come to St. Luke's and fill in there. It wasn't a problem, really, but I remember my mama writing in her book, integration is coming. And she was right, because eventually we had to integrate. We had a small congregation. Plus, with him preaching here, there at 9 and coming here at 10, it probably was a whole lot for him. Coming here, the families did come. And we came on a Sunday at 10 o'clock, because that was what time church started. And, you know, we were welcomed by the pastor and him letting them know we're in the congregation. And we stood. We sit back here, my mom and my dad, and that was our place. That was our seat back there. And, you know, other people were in the front and, you know, just all around. So we were welcomed. Some of the families knew my daddy, and, you know, they knew me growing up. I knew some of the students that went to Salisbury High. So it really wasn't a lot of friction then. Mrs. Well, I call her Miss Coombs. She was Dr. Elizabeth Duncan Coombs. She was my godmother. She and my mother were good friends growing up. And my mama would tell me, well, she called her Libby. She said, Libby doesn't have any children. And I asked her to be your godmother. I said, oh, you did? If you knew me as a little girl growing up, you knew that was my godmother. Because she called me Dora Virginia. And that's the reason some people call me Dora Virginia, because my mama called me Dora Virginia. She called me Dora Virginia. And she had a little nickname for me. She called me, I love sweet potato pie. And she called me sweet potato sometimes. Sweet potato, then I knew, okay, I'm winning brownie points. But she herself, as being a teacher, she taught special education. She came to become a famous lady. She was the first Black president of the National Education Association. She traveled overseas. And when she did, she would send me or bring me back things from Japan, Switzerland, little things that I kept, little dolls, little purses. And, I said, Miss Kuntz, she's been around, So, but then like I told them, I knew her as Miss Kuntz. And she, one day I saw her uptown, that brings that back. She was walking uptown one day. She had on sunglasses. And she said, well, hey, Dora Virginia. I said, hey, Miss Kuntz. We hugged. I said, where you going? She said, well, might be going to get me something to eat. I said, want me to go? Well, she said, you can. I said, why do you have on them sunglasses? Everybody knows who you are. She said, Dora Virginia, the sun is out. I didn't have on sunglasses. She said, Dora Virginia, the sun is out. I said, okay. But I just, have fond memories of her. She was a member here at St. Luke's. Like I said, she was a member of President Nixon's cabinet. When I was in college, she would write me letters. And she told me, she said, Dora, I will be leaving Nixon's cabinet. And I came home. I said, Mama, why is she writing me stuff like that, I said, I really, okay. I just said, okay, I read it. Sooner or later, they was impeached. And I always would say, she must have knew something. But, she was a good person. She was a good woman. And my mama would tell me, Dora, it's nothing that you can't do. And I'm like, Mama, are you sure? And she said, yeah. She said, you're like your daddy. He's a talker. And you too will stand up for yourself. She said, that's what you do. And, I believe that. And so I've stood up for myself. I've stood up for what is right. I've talked to my children at school about what is right and what they should do as far as race relations. So it's just been an experience for me, and I love to talk about it.
It's an interesting story about my experience at St. Philip's. St. Philip's was a small Black mission Episcopal church in Salisbury. It was located at the corner of West Marsh Street and South Caldwell Street. And it was in the 500 block. And I grew up at 526 West Marsh Street. I lived across the street from St. Philip's, and so I was an early Episcopalian by virtue of geography. And on Sundays, it was easy for my mother to get us dressed. I had a sister, Donna, who was 2 years older than I am, and Mom was, pretty much a perfectionist, and she would probably spend an hour ironing Donna's dress so that she would just be perfect. When she went to church, and same thing for me. She would have white shoes, and I remember her, with the white shoe polish, in the in the summer, the shoes were just, dazzlingly white, and even what I wore was just, ironed and starched. And so by the time she got us ready, she, did go to church. I don't recall that she ever went to St. Philip's, but she understood the importance of, children going to church on Sunday morning. And she had friends, I remember in particular, Elizabeth Duncan Kuntz, was a very good friend of hers. And I think that initially she came and picked us up on the way to church because she was a member of St. Philip's. And we would always, sit with Miss Kuntz. And, after a while, we got to the point where she didn't come out and pick us up. Mom would just get us across the street to the school. And to the extent that we thought that we were supposed to sit with Miss Kuntz. And remember one Sunday that Miss Kuntz had some other people, friends she brought in. There wasn't a lot of room on the pew, but Donna and I didn't know that we could sit anywhere else. And we just squeezed on in, and the other people realized that we were going to sit there, and we did. So I guess I can have a little sympathy with people as they get older, insisting on sitting on the same pew every Sunday. So I will be very generous and understanding of people who feel like, you've taken their seat. I will now understand and move. As I look back on my brief years as a child at St. Philip's, and you have to remember that that would be between the time I was probably 3.5 and 4 and 5, so it was a 2-year window in the recollections of a child at that time. And I was a child at the time. I remember that there were some unique and interesting things going on there. Every summer in Salisbury, they had what was called the Soapbox Derby. It was a big thing in the 50s where young men, I don't think girls were allowed to participate at that time, doubt that they would have wanted to, but they would make a soapbox racer, and essentially it was plywood, and they would get wheels, and there were regulations on it. And you would start top of the hill, and it was all gravity, so it was really a matter of making the sleekest vehicle, polished, and make sure the ball bearings were oiled on the wheels and that sort of thing, and you just raced down the hill, and everybody went. But I remember that no black person, no black boy, black young man had ever participated in that. And one of the men, well, he's a man now, and an accomplished gentleman, I think he's retired. His name was Cecil Simpson. His mother was Eloise Simpson, and she was an instructor, a professor in music at Livingstone College. And his father was also a professor at Livingstone College. And they had Cecil had a grandfather, Isaac H. Miller, who was, sort of a driving, force in the community, and he was always doing innovative things. He started a black credit union in the probably late 40s or 50s, and was always involved in things, to better the people. But as part of his legacy, and I guess the leadership in the home, Cecil was encouraged to be the first black boy to participate in the Soapbox Derby. And St. Philip's was the sponsor. So on his little card it said St. Philip's Episcopal Church. And he didn't win, but I remember, for years after that, at his grandfather's house on the front porch on West Monroe Street, that little Soapbox Derby racer was out there, and it was sort of reminder to everyone who passed by, that, you need to participate. It's not really important to win. It's important to participate, to be a part of. Winning is just sort of the cherry on top of the whipped cream, on top of the ice cream, on top of the cake. It's the whole experience. And it's great if you get the cherry, but most importantly, you need to make sure you get a piece of that cake and get a piece of the ice and get a piece of the whipped cream. And you've got 90% of it. If you get that, and that 90% is participation. But even after St. Philip ceased to be and had merged with St. Luke's, that little race car from the Soapbox Derby in what must have been the late 50s or very early 60s was out there. And it always reminded me when I went by that the fact that these things were assumed to be white events didn't really matter, that you could participate in anything and you could do anything. And Cecil didn't win, but in the larger sense, he is the greatest winner, because today I can't even tell you who else was in it, who won it, but to this day I remember Cecil and his determination and sticking with it when no one else would even try. I don't remember exactly when St. Philip's closed. I just have recollections that my sister and I were informed that St. Philip's would be merging with another church, with a white church, downtown. And Mom said that, we would be going to Morris Chapel, AME Zion Church, where my father belonged. My mother was from Granite Quarry, which is about 5 miles east of Salisbury, and she had grown up at White Rock AME Zion Church, so it was obvious, at that point that they would select an AME Zion Church. And the nearest one was Morris Chapel, which was within walking distance, so that we could get to church even when there wasn't a ride available. Back then, people didn't have cars like they do now. I think we had one car, and because my father worked in the kitchen at the VA hospital, he had to be at work at 5:30. So if Mom needed the car during the day for anything, she had to get up and take him to work and drop him off. And even though at that time it would not be unusual for a parent to take a spouse to work and leave the children sleep and come back, my mother was not going to leave us alone at the house. So if she had to have the car any day, we were going to get up at 5 o'clock. Everybody was going to have to ride to drop Dad off at work so that she could have the car for the day. So that's why it was important to select a church that was not only within walking distance, but it was a safe walk, because we grew up essentially a block from Livingstone College, so that walking down Monroe Street toward Morris Chapel would be essentially walking through the campus, and they could safely allow us to walk to church. I was confirmed at the Chapel of the Cross in Chapel Hill. I think it was probably my senior year there. I had a friend, C.V. Roberts, who was a member of St. Luke's. He has since deceased, who was a very good friend of mine growing up. He was about a year younger than I was. His mother died recently, Rose Roberts. And I was a very good friend with the Roberts family. C.V., his brother Joe, and his sister, I can't recall her name offhand. But he asked me to go to church with him one Sunday in Chapel Hill, and we went to the Chapel of the Cross. And I had not been in an Episcopal church since I was 5 years old, but it was something magical about the experience, and it reminded me of positive things from my childhood. And it was just, after that, I was back, and it was a wonderful experience. And actually, I remember another sort of interesting incident about that. Peter Lee was the rector at the Chapel of the Cross, at that time later Bishop of Virginia, and he had asked a Bishop Martin to do the confirmation class that year or receive us at confirmation. At the time, I didn't realize that Bishop Martin was the only black bishop in the Episcopal Church at the time. But in recent years, I have learned that he was from a little town in South Carolina called Jenkinsville, which is about 12, 15 miles from Winnsboro, which is about 30 miles north of Columbia, to kind of put it in perspective. And in that little town, there were basically two tracks. Either you're an Episcopalian or you're a member of the AME Church, as opposed to AME Zion. They're actually separate denominations. And Bishop Martin was from Jenkinsville. Well, my mother was born in Jenkinsville. Her mother died when she was 2 years old, and she was brought by an aunt to Granite Quarry, which is why she grew up there. But she was a Martin before she married my father, and it turned out that I had been confirmed at the Chapel of the Cross by a cousin and didn't realize it till 30 years later. You know, I don't even remember the first time coming here, because once I had become an Episcopalian in Chapel Hill and I graduated, well, naturally, I just came and I was warmly received. But of course, having gone to school here, I probably knew half of the congregation socially or through their children or otherwise. So I was just kind of just going to a different church. But yeah, I did not feel at all unwelcome. In fact, I felt very welcomed, and have remained a member here ever since. And and love St. Luke's. It's a very warm, welcoming place, and probably the most integrated congregation in Salisbury, having probably been the first integrated church in Salisbury. And that's what, one of the things I like about St. Luke's. The Episcopal Church is, considered a mainline denomination, but really I think it's pretty much the cutting edge as far as social progress. And I've found, St. Luke's, always sort of at the cutting edge of, social questions. And, it's a congregation where people are very tolerant. And I would think that there are probably members of the congregation that don't agree with everything that goes on here, and that some heartily agree with everything. But there's a cohesiveness among the members and a love among the members that, despite political beliefs, social beliefs, I think on Sunday morning, at least for an hour, we are all in union.